And hello again, folks. It is Friday at 7:30, so it's time to go back into the breach once again. So, Adrian, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, CR. Been busy lately getting ready. School starts this coming next week, college starts. And so I've been loading a lot of things into my electronic classes and getting ready for that. And I always feel like I could use a lot more time, but I think everything is well ready for next week.
Next week already, huh?
Yeah. I've always thought I wish the public schools and the colleges coordinated a little bit more. And I would love to start after Labor Day. It just gives you a little bit longer summer. But yeah, that's what I've been doing.
I always thought that the high schools and colleges should switch.
Mm-hmm.
High schools start early and the colleges, it's not like the college learning is less important, but at that time when you're going into college, you're an adult. So,
well, I know one thing too for my students with children is that the public schools, like their spring breaks, don't always align with ours either. And so when they plan family vacations, we're adjusting the time for their due dates so that they could actually plan a family vacation when the kids are out. So to me, like there would be a lot more benefits to alignment. So,
right. So, and I'm still busy at the Minnesota Transportation Museum. I haven't been there in a couple of weeks because I've had some back issues. But I've got that under wraps right now, and actually going in tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to work on. Last time I was out there, our SDP 40 325 had just shown up from Iowa after a restoration. So I actually I didn't think I was going to get next to her that day because we were unveiling her to the public and she was just going to sit on the round table. Well, advantage to mechanics because we can be all over everything when we want. It's our baby. So I got to actually
this standard color scheme.
Yep. So she has it is like a orange and a dark green. So she's got the dark green stripe down the middle with orange on either side. That's nice. Northern Pacific or Great Northern Railroad.
Great Northern, yeah.
But yeah, that was fun being able to go up into her cab, and she's a standard cab, so everything's a little bit smaller. The doors are half size of what doors are now. All the cabs now since like late 70s, early 80s have been what they call a safety cab, which it's a standard 10-foot cab and standard doors. But if you were to look at her door, I had to go in sideways to get in. So
yeah, we had a duck too, huh?
Yep.
So that kind of brings up the point that maybe we want to just pause and talk about just a little bit, is that our show here, our podcast, is a variety of topics. So you love the paranormal. I'm okay with it. Tonight we're talking paranormal. And then I bring in some other topics as well, medical coding, and we did not pick a theme to stick with. There are a lot of great paranormal shows out there,
right?
And we just felt like it would be fun to do different topics of different interest, and we have a lot of exciting things coming up. We have Doug Wagner is going to talk next week about how to protect your your private information, your financial information on your computer. And he's got some real topics of interest where he's going to talk about the Wayback Machine. He's going to talk about how to set up what email address you give. Whenever you sign up for anything or whenever you go somewhere, they want your email address, and then you get flooded. And it also is so he's going to talk about how to protect yourself that way.
Right.
And I mention the Wayback Machine?
Yep.
You can find information from previous sites on this Wayback Machine, and he's going to talk about that, how something you put on media is, of course, we know never private. Right. But you may think, well, this app has been taken down or this information isn't out there, but there's a lot of information that's still out there.
Yes.
So, yeah. Yep. So we're excited about that.
Well, and that's, IT is kind of a passion of mine too. I went to school for it. Didn't work out, partially because of COVID. But yeah, I mean, I learned enough to help myself out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing, even with medical coding, I talk about that because everything we do in the hospitals and the clinics, have an electronic medical record based with them, whether it's quality reporting on statistics, whether it's, how we report things to the CDC. It all comes from a system where we have to have IT programmers in there with us and helping us to get that information out. We want it accessible, but at the same time, we want it protected for patients. And so, it's the modern world we live in.
Well, and we're still human, and to err is human. And there's been instances of, like, the one biggest thing I can think of is doctors pulling the wrong information for the wrong patient with the patient in the room.
Yeah, and we have a lot of standards around that now with and that's why I tell people don't get too frustrated when they ask you to repeat your name and date of birth, 12 times during your visit. If you're going down to X-ray, if you're going down to lab, be glad, because what they're really doing is confirming they have the right record before they document is one of the things, and the right medical history, of course, is another. And so there's a lot of safeguards that have been put up and around that as well.
Oh, it's just like the surgical room rundown, right before the patient comes in, they all take a huddle and they all confirm on, okay, this patient is coming in, we're doing this is their name, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody in the room understands, and they a lot of times, in minor procedures, they'll involve the patient in that as well. And it's really it's a safety check. But it was a point in our country where we said, okay, even surgeons, even doctors need checklists, right? Because we're all human, and those things make a difference in life or death. Yeah, so we have a lot of exciting topics coming up. This fall, we'll talk to medical coding. So be looking, make sure that you, CR, what do they need to do on your website, on our website? Can you talk about that a little bit so that people get notified of our shows and dates and times?
Okay, so actually, we're only broadcasting to YouTube tonight. There was a problem on Facebook, but all you have to do is go to Shortwave Media Presents On My Mind podcast with Adrian and CR. And I know that's a long one, but
on Facebook.
And like the page. And then I think there's notifications somewhere that you can check.
Mm-hmm.
I know for YouTube, go to On My Mind podcast with CR on YouTube. Like and subscribe us. And once you subscribed us, click that little bell icon and drop down. I think it's check all.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you do that, you'll get notifications every time we're on. I know that's what all the other YouTubes are saying is like and subscribe and click that bell icon and change your settings to all time. And then every time you'll get a notification when we come on.
Great. Well, let's talk about the Philadelphia experiment.
Sure.
You want to give us a little rundown on what the scoop is with that? It's something that occurred in 43 and it has not completely gone away in terms of being.
No, and it hasn't, and it's got a whole bunch of things going for it. It's got wartime. So we're talking like October 43. She was just a brand new ship at that time. She had just come out of the shipyard, had her commissioning ceremony, brand new crew, but they didn't go out to sea trials right away, or they did. But the conspiracy is that there was an experiment done on her with teleportation and time travel. But a lot of people have been able to shoot holes in that theory. And basically, from what I've heard and what I've talked to Navy veterans about is they were working on the degaussing system and getting that up and running and doing experiments on that. And what degaussing is it's they string a series of electrical cables over the side of the vessel. And basically, when they pass electricity through that, it's supposed to lessen their chance of attracting a magnetic mine. And it's also supposed to cut down their radar cross section. So, you're an enemy and you're looking for a destroyer escort, and you're seeing something the size of a pigeon, or you're seeing something the size of a house compared to something the size of the Eldridge.
And this would have been huge at the time. I mean, in itself, it's amazing technology at that time because
yes,
when we think about like the German subs, and this was 2 years into the war, and Germany ruled the ocean with the amount of ships that they, the cargo ships and everything else that we were trying to even help Great Britain with, and this would be huge in itself if you could get a way for a ship to avoid a radar detection.
mm-hmm.
I think that was the technology, and that's what they were truly working on this, on that. Not necessarily like, not invisible to the naked eye.
Right.
But invisible, you said, to mines, electromagnetic mines.
Yes. Yep.
And radar.
Yep. Because those were besides the wolf pack, the magnetic mines and the radar were two of the biggest problems for crossing the Atlantic at the time. And a lot of people don't understand, but radar was in its infancy in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there was that radar was at Pearl Harbor. They mistook the first wave of Japanese bombers and planes coming in for a flight of B-17s coming in from the mainland. And I do believe that was user error. They weren't trained in enough to know the difference between, a couple hundred ship flight and like 3 or 4 B-17s.
Mm-hmm.
But what you see here is the USS Eldridge. USS Eldridge was a destroyer escort. She was laid down 22nd February of 1943 by Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Newark, New Jersey. Eldridge was launched on 25 July of 43, sponsored by Lieutenant Commander Eldridge's widow, Mrs. John Eldridge Jr., and commissioned on 27 August of 43. Now goes into a little bit of war history, but we're not going to get that far. And basically what I'm using here is I'm using Wikipedia. So, I mean, some of the stuff we looked up, it's just a lot of information to keep in hand.
Well, we did cross-check it with some sites like Historic History Mysteries and other sites as well.
Right. So the Philadelphia experiment was a purported naval military experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Pennsylvania, sometime around 28 October of 43, in which Eldridge was to be rendered invisible, i.e. cloaking device, to human observers for a brief period. The story is considered a hoax and complete hearsay. There is a general lack of evidence for the alleged experiment. The person who started the myth, a merchant seaman named Carl Meredith Allen, admitted that he made up the story and relayed it to author and UFOologist Morris K. Jessup. And this story made it into the Eldridge's deck log and war diary. And that's actually preserved in a museum.
A couple of interesting things you mentioned that as you're talking about this, I'm kind of unpacking it, that you told me was that, first of all, the USS Philadelphia was not home. I mean, this was not one of its ports, right? It was stationed out of, was it New York or?
Yeah, it was, so she left. For the war, she left out of New York Navy Yard.
And then you were saying that this supposedly happened, like this Carl Allen, and he goes by pseudonym when he wrote into Carlos Allende.
Mhm.
But this person said that he was in Norfolk when the ship teletransported and he saw it.
Yeah.
But you were mentioning the problem with that is that it was out to sea in October when supposedly this had happened.
Right. Well, she was doing. She was a brand new ship, and for people who don't understand the way that the Navy works, is for probably, well, when a new ship is going to be built and it's in the stages of outfitting. So the ship has been built and the outfitting is going on, meaning they're putting everything into the ship that they need. The crew has already been formed, and the crew actually does a lot of that work. So there's camaraderie that starts from the crew, and the crew gets to know their ship while they are fitting out. What was I saying? What was the
We
question?
were talking about Carl when he was saying it materialized in Norfolk, and we were saying that the ship was out
Oh,
to sea, and
yeah.
then
So she
it,
was at that time she was ported in the naval shipyard, and she was brand new. And when the ships knew, they don't just all pile in and take off with systems untested. There's years and years and years of system testing and going through the motions on how to do things, not necessarily going out and doing them right away, but getting the procedure down and teaching their crew that muscle memory. So then when they have to do it for real, there's no thinking, you just do. So part of that is what I was saying is when the vessel is laid down and they're fitting out, the crew, they won't necessarily live on board during the fitting out, but they'll live in the Navy Yard and they'll report to the ship every day and help fitting out. And then after the commissioning ceremony, they're going to keep fitting out, doing whatever they do, and then they don't just get on the ship and take off. They do something called a sea trial, where they will have a certain amount of tasks for a time frame, and they want to practice undocking and docking, and they want to practice travel, and they want to practice certain things underway. So they will maybe plot a 200 to 300 mile radius offshore to go out and again practice the mundane things that they'll have to do in a day-to-day business.
Ciara, was there any evidence that the Philadelphia was in the shipyard in Pennsylvania?
I don't know. I don't think so. They say she was never there. And what I've read tonight kind of leads to the fact that no, she wasn't. They say indeed that when she left out in 44 to go, I think she was used in the island hopping campaigns like Guadalcanal and Tinian and all that. But when she left out of New York Harbor.
Okay, so the place and time doesn't really fit. The other
No.
thing is I interrupted your story, so you hadn't even got to like the most horrid part of this.
Right.
So
Mr. Allen was saying that, so he was a merchant marine, and merchant marines are very pivotal to our World War II victory, because they kept the supplies going from the eastern seaboard out to the UK. And the reason that we had these destroyer escorts is the protection convoys that would go with these merchant marines. And I think I'm kind of building on a theory here why I think Allen did what he did, and I think it was PTSD. I think at that time they didn't call it PTSD, but you're getting on a boat and you're sailing for maybe a month and a half, and you don't know what's under the water, you don't know what's coming, and when the German U-boats do attack, it's quick, and there's a lot of panic, and so you're on this merchant marine freighter. You're unprotected. I mean, at the later time, the later dates in the war, they did put Orlikins and they did put deck guns on merchant marine ships, but that was far and few between. So they were solely relying on the Navy to protect them. And what I'm thinking is happening is Alan was so stressed and so wrought full of anxiety that he just made it up. Now, someone could probably shoot holes in my theory, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, because he said his account is that he was on his ship in the Philadelphia harbor
In Norfolk.
or Norfolk. Yep.
Yeah. When? Yeah.
And the ship just materialized out of the ether. There was like a green mist and it appeared. And then some of the accounts said he saw it appear, disappear, and then reappear. And on that reappearance, there was a lot of screaming going on the vessel. You could see guys running on the forepeak. You could see guys out on the bridge wing. And the really scary part was that he said that there were sailors that were missing altogether, and there were also sailors that were part of the ship. And when I mean part of the ship, like there was a rip in time, and half of their body is sticking out of the bulkhead one way, and half of their body is sticking out of the bulkhead the other way. Or
and are they like dying at that, dead or dying? I would imagine.
Yeah.
When I think about, like, okay, if you're talking about time travel and you're talking about two objects going through space and time, because apparently it was time travel as well, one of the claims. But anyway, if you're going through space and time and you're both projecting yourself to that same part, you get fused, right?
Yes.
Or you could, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the theory?
They were basically talking about the time rip didn't, something went wrong. Something went wrong when they were figuring out the mathematics on the teleportation, and it didn't go completely right.
So was Alan saying, I know you were saying that during that time there was talk about Einstein's unified theory, kind of the theory of everything, where he was looking at all the elemental particles of physics, and then also saying with electromagnetism, and he had this theory about everything, but researchers say that was never complete. However, I think Alan said that Einstein actually unpacked all that for him. Like, he explained the whole thing like they were buddies or something. I think that's where some of his story, story falls apart in a lot of areas, but I think that was one of them. But, it probably, there were very brilliant men like Einstein and Tesla, and there are a lot of, there's hope that, I guess, I don't have the hope, but there are people that have the hope that we can conquer that kind of space and time travel. And to me, it's just like, let God be God and leave it alone. Right.
Well, and there's a funny thing that you mentioned, the time travel is that's one of the topics in the paranormal is time travelers. I've never seen one. I've never talked to one, but I remember when I was growing up, you and Dad and I used to listen to good old Art Bell, and Art had a couple of supposed time travelers on his show, and
Mhm.
it's interesting because they would talk about things kind of like Nostradamus,
Mhm.
talked about things where they would come back and they would say, okay, well, this is going to happen at this date and this time, or this may not, it may come partially true, but you'll have to live through it to find out. Um, I just don't think, I don't think what Alan said happened,
Mhm.
because it would be completely different if it did.
Yeah, I agree. And here's the interesting thing, though. The Office of Naval Research, when you mentioned Alan, Alan was in, he had this, the, the book from Jessup was the case for the UFOs. And it was,
Mm-hmm.
Alan had went in and wrote all over the margins a little cryptic notes. And actually there were supposedly 3 people who wrote in it. And then he wrote this letter in and sent this together with the book to the Office of Naval Research. The interesting thing is they actually researched it.
Right.
So they did an investigation,
Mm-hmm.
which to me is amazing. And in that investigation, the findings were that there just weren't any facts supporting this so-called experiment in, in of the Eldridge.
Right.
But oh
So,
my gosh, if you had to combine a really cool, we're talking paranormal, we're talking teleportation,
right.
disappearance, and
Yep.
time travel, right? What, did I miss anything?
No, I
I
mean, that,
mean, oh my gosh, all in one story.
right.
And then the horrid thing, because didn't he say like the Navy tried to cover it up because that's always the claim that it was top secret and that's why we don't know
Right.
about it.
Yep.
And I mean, that would be true in the fact that Navy could cover something to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that he asserted was that the Navy sent some of these men, they committed them to mental hospitals, even if maybe they didn't need it. I got the idea was that then they could just say they were crazy. But
Right.
again, there's people were like, where's the facts? Because
Mm-hmm.
Jessup, the author of that UFO book, he got queries from Carl as well, but he could never pin him down on any evidence.
Right.
This
So,
long way. I mean, this went a long way for something with no evidence.
right. I mean, this event, if Alan had his way and it actually happened, this event happened in 1943. Now, this Morris Jessup, who he is he's basically the grandfather of ufologists.
Yeah.
And a ufologist is someone who studies UFOs and UFO reports and
Oh, yes.
and-
See, I
yeah,
missed the UFO connection. There you
yep.
go.
So there's the connection on that. But Jessup didn't write the case for the UFO until 1955. And Allen didn't come forward
Oh,
until the mid to late 60s.
say that again.
So
Just
Jessup
wrote it in 50.
Jessup didn't write the book until 1956 or 55.
Okay.
But Allen didn't come forward with what happened, his version of it, until the mid to late 60s.
Well, that's what 22 years
Um,
after. 22 years 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 after. 22 years
And unfortunately for myself, I just can't. I can't believe what I can't trust what Alan is saying because look at the stage of the book that he sent.
Oh, yeah.
It's not normal for somebody to write like that, and usually when you do have examples of books of
You
someone
mean
who's gone to
like
an
writing in the
extreme.
margins and the
Yep.
odd writing? I know in his writing, it wasn't always well stated, and there were parts that were like super capitalized and it was all over the
Right.
place.
To me that screams break.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had a mental break.
There's
Which
part of me that says, though, could it be true? I mean, I don't know if everybody's like that, but I'm
who
just
knows?
like, there's part of you that's like, ooh, well, that could,
Well,
you know.
and I think I've told you. I know that Dad knows, but I've seen a UFO. I believe in them. Um, I can't deny what I saw, and I can't explain off what I saw, and that is the biggest thing for people in the paranormal is
Mhm,
we know what we saw to get us into this,
mhm,
and we've tried to debunk it,
mhm,
and we can't. So in our minds, they are real. Like Doc Z saw Bigfoot. I'm not going to be one of those out there that, you were exhausted, you were walking down the hill, it was hot out, swamp gases, whatever.
You don't
Um,
wanna gaslight Dr. Z or Doc Z.
no.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, we do that a lot, and we do it quite easily to people,
Mhm.
and that's why I was like, well, it would just be easy to say, well, this guy's crazy, or this guy is, and
Right.
making it all up. But you know, the thing is, like, you could be crazy and still be telling the truth about something.
Oh yeah.
You could be mentally unhinged and
Well,
telling the truth.
it kind of reminds me of The Boy Who Cried Wolf,
Hmm.
you know, or
I
yeah,
think
I mean, 'cause you're
I
just you, but that's hard too, and you know, I've unfortunately seen it with people with mental issues where it's real to them. Like I was saying with the UFOs, I've seen a
Mhm,
UFO. I know what I saw. I know I saw it. I know it was there, but other people, groups of other people weren't there to see it. There was
mhm,
another person there when I saw it, and he and I can't expel what we
mhm,
saw. Um, but usually people think that if it's not seen by a group of people,
mhm,
and that group of people can't go to other groups of people and say, this is what we saw, it didn't happen.
mhm.
But yeah, I mean, you got to think, how the hell did the Navy keep um, a group of men on a destroyer escort quiet?
Well, not only, yeah, that, and like in their families too, because you're talking about a whole crew or whoever was on the ship at the time. Maybe it was more of a limited crew, depending on that. But you still have a lot of associations on that. You have families, you have people, and there were that the ONR, Office of Naval Research, did research other people at the shipyard in Norfolk and had statements that there was nothing odd that happened. There was no appearance or materialization of a battle. It was a destroyer, yeah, that there.
Yeah.
So I think that's the hard thing is it wouldn't just be the Navy denying it, but it would be like you said, and yeah, they're a top secret and stuff, but still look at the impact this would have had.
Right.
And maybe that's, I kind of lost my train of thought, but
It happens.
it does happen, unfortunately.
I was trying to look up how many men were aboard one.
Or how many he claimed was.
Yeah. And I'm not.
And Jessup, he was the how do you say it? Ufologist?
Ufologist. Yep.
He had a sad life. I think he ended up committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And back then there wasn't a lot of help for depression and that type of thing, but
Right.
they question his stability as well. And part of me hates it because if you have like a depressive disorder or you have something wrong with you in the mental health arena, it doesn't mean like you're fabricating things.
Right.
But it does go with things like schizophrenia or psychosis, those kind of things.
Well, and they didn't understand that at that point, and
They didn't have all of the medications, that they do today, and the better treatment plans for people and help and support systems.
Right. Still trying to figure out.
But yeah, I mean, even if you had a limited crew on that, you're still impacting a lot of people because those crew members have families, they have friends. Right. If they were put in a mental hospital, would anybody speak out? I mean, and if they said, oh, well, that 50 to 80% of this crew was institutionalized after this time period,
Yeah.
in early November. And what I don't know. I mean, I think the unfortunately the deaths would be easier than the hospitalizations. There is a claim though, because died in battle, right, or died out on the sea or whatever. But there is a claim, that people who said, well, they put them in mental hospitals and they didn't tell the family.
Mm-hmm.
I believe was the actual accusation. Right. And that is just a horrid thing to think about. Like, I think death would be easier because, the mental hospitals at that time, they probably would have been in a naval mental hospital or
horrible. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily, I don't know. I think they would have gone to a asylum. They probably would have asylum or sanatory and just,
languish.
Well, we'll put you here.
We'll put you in enough drugs to where you don't care or can't get up.
So yeah, I do seriously believe that what Alan said is not true. And I believe basically what this was is it was they were working on the degaussing system, developing degaussing systems for the ship. Because they didn't have degaussing systems at the time, and basically what the degaussing system is. I mean, I'm no electrical engineer, so I really couldn't tell you what this diagram is, but it is I believe it's the control board to the degaussing system, and basically what the system's hooked up as.
So the degaussing system's real, and it's not just for destroyers, right? It's for
Nope.
other class of ships.
Yep.
And tell me,
Every single Navy ship today has a degaussing system.
it's quite an operation when they do it, right? Because they're putting the lines completely around the ship. Is that correct? The cables?
Yeah, so there's antennas all around. I know for aircraft carriers, they have antennas off the bottom side of the deck. The wrapping the cables around the ship was probably how they did it in the 40s. I don't know how they do it now. They could probably, be able to do a lot better with the technology that we have now. But I know that with aircraft carriers, and I'm thinking of a certain one, the USS Nimitz. They look like whiskers all over her flight deck, pointed down towards the water. Some of those are communications. Some of those are different types of antennas, but some of those are used for degaussing. A lot of the communication antennas on her are up on top of the island.
Can these cables snap? Is it a danger?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm thinking, if I'm thinking the way that they're attached, they're under the.
Okay. So if they did, they're.
Yeah, it's not like they're pumping high voltage. It's a voltage, but it is a low voltage.
And
enough to interfere with radar.
So a big ship can, you said, like appear as a bird or a small boat.
Right. Yeah. So you could take the Eldridge and shrink it down to the size of a normal house, or you could take the Nimitz and shrink it down to the size of the Eldridge. You're not going to make them invisible on radar, but you're going to knock down what they call the radar cross section of the vessel.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier, protect it from landmines, which even World War II and after World War II is a concern.
Yeah, the magnetic maritime mines. So basically what those are is they have a huge anchor at the bottom of this chain. So they got this huge chain with the anchor on it, and it's attached to the mine itself that looks like a sphere with a bunch of little pokey things out of the spear.
I've seen them a lot on movies.
Yep. So when those are dropped in, they're activated. Now, mine layers were not made of steel, because if you're activating a magnetic mine on a steel boat, you're going up. So all of the World War II and World War I mine layers were made of wood. So probably a vessel half the size of the Eldridge. The Eldridge was pretty damn small. Because she wasn't quite a Corvette size, but she was smaller than a destroyer. And they had these small sizes to them so they could get around quick.
Maneuverability.
Exactly, and that's what you wanted, because destroyer escorts are usually the ones that were able to get a bearing on the U-boats. And fire something off if they could, or they would call in the position to a destroyer that would have torpedoes. The destroyer escorts, if you look on the back there, it looks like they're set up with a depth charge launcher, and
So that's
basically,
this winching system here.
well, that's a winch, but I think on the back they have one. They would have one set up back there.
Okay.
Some of them were just a set of steel rails with
Mm-hmm.
a ramp that would go down off the back, and they would just set the depth on these barrels and roll them off the back. They also had ones that were
Just
flung
trying
out
to
of a
see it. I
launcher.
don't think I have a picture of the back.
No.
No. Okay.
Other depth charges were shot out of a launcher. And basically what those were is they were like a 55-gallon drum full of explosives with a pressure sensitive switch on it that when it reached a certain depth, it would detonate. And what they were hoping to do is they were hoping to induce a pressure wave big enough to crack the pressure hull on the submarine.
Oh, wow.
So that's when you're watching a World War II Navy movie and you see, the depth charges coming off the back of the ship, and you see the big plume of water go up. That is the depth charge.
Wow.
Now, they weren't just looking for that plume of water. What they were looking for was the debris that came up in the secondary plume. So that would have been ship stuff, guys.
Wow.
And that's how they would say, okay, yeah, you got them. So
being in the Navy today is a lot different than being in the Navy back then. Before we had some of this protective technology.
It's leaps and bounds technology with all this, and even when Dad was in, and I'm gonna just mention the system because it's not used anymore, but maybe it is, but I don't know enough of it to get in trouble. And I know that the names are out there, so I can say it. But it's a system called Operation Friend or Foe. Mm-hmm. And basically what that was is it was a space on the ship, and the space on that ship had technology that helped the ship figure out if approaching vessels, airplanes, ships, submarines were friend or foe. Because I know about it because I watch Battleship New Jersey's YouTube channel. And the curator, Ryan Szymanski, has gone into the Operation Friend or Foe room, and it's just nothing but empty racks. And he said that when the ship was given to the museum as the museum ship, the Navy went on and basically, like redacting a letter, went in and pulled off everything they didn't want the civilian organization to have.
Sure.
And I actually just watched the update for that. She is headed to her third dry dock since she's been a museum. And the reason that they're doing a dry dock is...
What is the ship's name?
It's the USS West Virginia. Let me check. Yes, USS West Virginia, BB-48.
Okay. What was interesting before, when you were talking to me before the show, you told me what eventually happened to the Eldridge. Here we have a ship you were just talking about. It was a museum, right?
Yep.
now. And tell us what happened to the Eldridge.
So the Eldridge was actually instead of being scrapped or instead of being put into museum quality, she was actually sold off to one of our partner nations, and they put her into service as a naval vessel, and it was the Greek Navy that purchased her from the U.S. Navy.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, I remember listening to Art Bell's show about the Philadelphia experiment, and whoever he was talking to said that this really came to light in like 1990 because um, the Greek edition of Playboy did like a 2-page run on the USS Eldridge, underneath the name of the ship that they had, and they did a little blip about the Philadelphia experiment, like right in the middle of Playboy. They had an article about this ship.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. Like I've never seen that article. I've read it, but I never saw the
That
original
when the
article.
Greek Navy put the ship to rest. I mean, that was pretty late, 90.
Yeah. Yep. That's when she was struck off of the Greek Navy records, was in 90.
Okay. So that brought
So
a lot out. Yeah.
right.
Interesting. Well, interesting.
So
It's history, it's um what do you say, legend, a legend wrapped with some
right.
history, and it is very
Yep.
interesting that way. Paranormal, we like it because it has I forgot about the UFO connection, because
Right.
there was reported alien connection with the whole
Yeah.
experiment. I don't know the details
In,
about that.
increased activity. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, and it's funny because there's a whole lot of UFO stories coming out from World War II now. Like all of these pilots that were flying up at night or dusk, coming back from bomb runs. They'd be coming in at dusk and they'd be seeing things. So it's in the World War II vets were really tight-lipped about their service. I think it's just coming out now because the stories are coming out from their children.
It's hard that we lost, and probably very few of the greatest generation left
Mm-hmm.
now.
Well, unfortunately, and I never met him. He was an Easy Company vet, 101st Airborne, but Vincent Speranza made his final jump into heaven 2 weeks ago.
He was paratrooper.
He was a paratrooper in Easy Company 101st.
Okay.
So the HBO miniseries called Band of Brothers, he was in that division.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of the Philadelphia experiment episode on My Mind. But instead of ending right away, I kind of wanted to talk about maybe well, we talked that Doug's coming on next week. Let me get my notes out here. So
A
Doug
lot of
Wagner,
good information from Doug about free ways to free, so you don't have to buy programs, ways
Yeah.
to protect your computers, so your
Correct.
laptops, your hard drives.
Yep. So then that takes us into September. And kind of a pretty much have a booked September. I have one opening which you and I had kind of talked about, but I want to bring that up here in a second. But Friday, September 1st at 6 o'clock CST, we're going to be talking about the history and hauntings of the Queen Mary.
Mm.
And I do believe, do we have a guest lined up for that?
No, we had, but I think that fell through. So
Okay.
I think we'll see what we could do.
Sure. Well, and that's one of those things where I've
And you've
actually
been on the Queen Mary,
yes, I have been
and
aboard.
you have some things to tell. So
Yes, I have had my own experiences on board. And looking at the calendar, the 8th, the Friday after that, did we have somebody on?
did you have Alexis written down for medical coding? Is she in
Um,
October? She's October.
yeah, I had that October 6th.
Yeah. So on the 8th, did you have something you wanted to put in or?
Well, the 8th, it looks like I have Pastor Neil marked down there.
Okay. Yep. We'll
Um,
touch base with him.
and then so that would be the show for the 3rd. And then that brings us to the week of the 15th. But as many of you know, and I hope all of you American citizens understand what's coming up in September.
Mhm.
We're going to do a memorial show for 9/11 on 9/11. And we're going to talk about not just what happened that day and what transpired, but what happened in our family and what had to happen to reunite the three of us back together in our home. So we're going to be talking about that. And if you're watching that night, go ahead and leave us a comment, or I might even, I don't know, I'm hesitating on opening up the phone lines that night or not. I think
So
if
we knew that, we have had close to 1,000 comments on, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, a couple hundred. I think it's over 800 comments now on just the fact that we're doing a show. So
right.
it may be a lot to handle with call-ins, I think maybe
Yeah,
is what you're thinking of.
I think we'll just
But
we can both manage the comment section that night.
yeah, on the other hand, you can certainly text in experiences or questions for us.
Right.
I think you're just thinking it's a lot to handle the text, the talking, and call-in phone line.
Yeah. So then that brings us to what would be a show on the 15th. But since we did a show on that Monday, we're
We're
going to
not
leave
going to
that
do our
one
usual
open.
Friday. We're
So
taking a break. Yeah.
so you and I can have a break. The weekend after that is the one that I had in question, which is the 22nd. And I was thinking of doing another show on the Navy about an incident that occurred in 1988 aboard the USS Iowa.
Yeah, we could do that. The other thing I thought would be good, we're talking about ships, is the Titanic sister ship, the Olympic. Have you read about the theory that when the Titanic sunk, there's a theory that it really was the Olympic, and that the White Star Line, the theory is the White Star Line actually switched the ships.
Right.
That might be an interesting one as well.
Yes. Yeah. So the USS Iowa is a battleship, BB-61. and I'll just fill the folks in here and then we can end it. But basically, what happened was it was spring of 1988, and they were out in the Atlantic doing. I forget the name of the particular naval exercise, but they were in part of a naval exercise and they were on a gunnery range, and turret 2, which would have been the second set of 16-inch naval guns, there was what they call a out of battery explosion on the middle gun, and unfortunately some hatches were left open, and the flames and percussion not only took everybody out in the gun rooms, but shot down 3 to 4 decks into the powder handling storage room. And there's conspiracy on that one, because there are a number of sailors after the fact that when they were steaming back to port, they saw things being pulled out of the turret and jettisoned overboard. Not only did they see big objects, but they saw paperwork being jettisoned overboard. So there is a big conspiracy theory to what happened.
Like that's the at sea shred it machine, right?
Right. Yeah. We don't want it found, so it's going overboard.
Yeah.
But there is a really good movie if people like watching the movie, and I'll lend it to you because I have it. It's called A Glimpse of Hell, and it is a movie done on the explosion. Do you remember the sitcom House?
Oh yeah.
So Hugh Laurie plays House, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the guy that played his buddy and fellow doctor,
the oncologist, I don't know his actor name, but I know who you're talking about.
Right. He is in A Glimpse of Hell. He plays a either an ensign or a lieutenant.
Cool.
But yeah, it was, and there's a lot of budget cuts in that one too, because so the battleships, I'll just mention this and then we'll end the show, but the majority of the last set of battleships, so the Iowa class battleships, were built early World War II, and they were put to sea. So they fought in World War II, and then they were not needed. So then they were inactive, put in the mothball fleet, and then Korea happened. So they brought them out, took them out of mothballs, revamped them, sent them out for Korea. Korea ends. They don't have a need for it. They come back. They go back into the inactive fleet. Vietnam comes around and they do the same thing. They pull them out. They modernize them. They ship them off to Yankee Station and the Gulf of Tonkin. Because think about it, they can sit 25 miles offshore and lob shells the size of cars 25 miles and hit a target.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's like putting Sugar Ray Leonard in, or Muhammad Ali into the ring to just beat the piss out of this little guy.
Yeah, I think your uncle, when he was on the USS Saratoga in the Gulf War, that was the situation, was like, I was really worried, and he was like reassuring me that
Right.
A lot safer than I thought it was for him.
Yeah.
And he was
Uh,
a mechanic on the planes on the
right. What was I saying? Oh,
oh, the cost of
due to
the movie.
the lifespan of the
Mhm.
Iowa. So along with her sister ship, the mighty they call her the Mighty Mo, but the USS Missouri, um, they kept getting pulled in for conflict, and then when they weren't needed, it was a lot more cost effective to pull them out of service and what they call mothball them, but
Mhm.
keep them ready, but in disuse.
Yeah, we've seen that, Bremerton, Washington, they had
Right, the
some.
mothball fleet
Mhm.
in the bay there.
Yeah,
Um, so in 1980 was when Ronald Reagan was in, I think like 83.
early 80s, I think, yeah.
He signed a bill into act, and that brought back the Wisconsin, the Missouri, and the Iowa, and another, I think. Um, but basically, what happened is in in '88, it was like junkyard wars to keep these battleships going.
My light just went out. Oh, well, we're about ready to wrap up.
Right. So there's on that side of it, basically they were talking about that due to the budget cuts, that they didn't have enough money to keep specific safety measures for the guns in
Mm,
the loading room up to date. And they were
right.
talking about there were two speeds for the ramming device. There was a high speed to put the shell in to the barrel, and then there was a low speed to ram the bags, because these powder bags were made in the 40s. That's how many powder bags they made. They didn't make any new powder bags in Korea. They didn't make any new powder bags in Vietnam. Um, so you wanted to ram those bags in as slow as possible, but they were saying that the rammer operator in that room that day was brand new.
Mm.
Had never really gone through an actual exercise with
Yeah, I
live.
mean, we're talking skills. You can't just throw it together. Like, yeah, we're talking.
Well, no, and we're talking 1988, and we're talking a job that was prolific from World War I all the way through to Korea,
Mhm.
and then stopped. Well, you take a dog out of the fight for that long, you're not going to have instructors that actually know what they're doing. You're going to
Mhm.
have instructors that are going to be reading out of a textbook and understanding theory and not exactly knowing how to do it.
Mhm.
And I think they were saying there was a big disconnect between the training they should have had to be up to speed for that exercise and the level of competency that they had in that gun room.
Oh, I can imagine.
Um, but pretty much everybody I've talked to is saying that it was a out of battery explosion due to a smoldering powder bag.
Are we talking the movie set or the actual occurrence in
The
the?
actual occurrence.
Okay.
So it was a bag of powder that had gotten hot somehow,
Oh,
and it
wow.
just so when they load these things, the barrels are brought to a 5-degree angle, and the breech is let down into the loading room, and then the spanner tray comes down and spans the gap between the loading rack and the breech.
Mhm.
And that spanning tray is brass. Everything in that room is brass to help not have a spark.
For a good reason, right? Yeah.
But you can still have static go off, and that'll kick off any loose powder. But
Yeah.
that is going to be, I could sit here and talk
Yeah,
about that for
I
ages.
that's no doubt. We called you like Sir Talk a Lot when you were
Right.
younger.
Well, it's a good
Well,
thing I have a
interesting though, Chris.
for her.
Interesting. Very
Right.
interesting. And thank you so much for your knowledge base and explaining that.
Right. So, well, it's about 20 minutes after the show usually stops.
Yep.
Um,
I'm in the dark, so good time.
Unfortunately, tonight we not only did we lose Facebook, but we lost Blog Talk. So,
Okay.
we streamed only to YouTube on this
Okay.
episode, which, you know, it'll happen. Technical difficulties, but so.
Well, for those of you who stayed on, thank you very much. Everybody have a great night.
Yeah, we'll talk to everybody. I will be back on tomorrow night at 7:00 with Brady and Lucas and a friend of ours, Don Breaker. And we're going to be doing episode 3 of Steel Rail.
Nice.
And we're going to be talking, the subject is we're going to be talking about 2 influential, they're not diesel locomotives, 2 influential locomotive types in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. One is the gas electric turbine, GTEL. They also call them bird burners. And then the other one is the coal turbine locomotive. So basically with the GTELs, they took an engine out of like a 707 and plopped it in the back of a locomotive. So
wow. That is interesting. Well, see you tomorrow night. I will try to listen in.
All right, sounds good. And for everybody else, we'll catch you next time, and have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.